I have the biggest cheese on my grin. Grin on my face, the biggest cheese. Anyway, you are listening to the Good Girl Podcast. I am Cameo King, your host. The Good Girl Podcast is redefining the good through uncomfortable truths, and we call those confessions. So every week we have someone on sharing a confession, sharing an uncomfortable truth about themselves, and the goal is healing, wholeness, and so you can walk in your freedom and your authenticity. Again, I'm Cameo King. The reason why I'm cheesing, y'all, this show that's coming up, can I get an Emmy for this? Like the gems that were dropped, the convert, y'all. I'm gonna shut up. We about to get to these sponsors for this show, and I'm gonna let y'all have it. Before we hop into the sponsors, do not forget to continue to vote for us for Detroit's favorite podcast. We were nominated by the Detroit Choice Awards to become Detroit's favorite podcast. You can just hit that link in our bio on Instagram and make sure you do that and vote. You can vote as many times as you want to. Also, if you love this podcast, share this podcast. Leave us a rating on wherever you listen to your podcast. All this helps. So listen to a message from our sponsors. The Ingham County Health Department wants to make sure you are connected and aware of any and all updates on COVID-19. You are encouraged to head to hd.ingham.org for more information on testing sites, vaccine updates, and COVID-19 vaccine distribution. You can also email coronavirus@ingham.org or call 517-887-4517. Again, that email address, coronavirus@ingham.org or call 517-887-4517. And as always, if you want your product, if you want your business, your organization to be featured on the Good Girl Podcast, that can be you. What you just heard, that can be you. Just send us a message, or on our website, you can click our media kit to see what we're all about, see our reach. You can be a part of Detroit's favorite podcast. You can. And as always, before we hop into the confession, you have to learn a little bit about who we're talking to. And so let's learn a little bit about the homie, Jay Hall.
We made it do what it do. That's like the Detroit experience. Like, we didn't need to have the tall skyscraper building.
Jay Hall is a writer, multimedia co-host, personality, and obviously a Detroiter.
This was our culture. Like, you get out the car, you walk, you chilling in your car at the red light. The light is green. Ain't nobody gonna pressure you to go and nothing like that, because everybody talking. And it was a feeling.
Jay is reminiscing on his two loves, Detroit summers and hip hop.
Yeah, I was very blessed to know what I wanted to do at a very young age. I knew I wanted to be a voice. Hip-hop was my first love. That was something about people being able to grab a microphone, say what they want to say, and getting people's attention and saying what was going on around them. I gravitated towards that.
And he took his love seriously. He works for AURN, American Urban Radio Networks, and he's the co-host of the nationally syndicated Hip Hop Matrix show. Jay says he found a value in hip-hop that he discovered as a kid, and it's even true to this day.
I didn't know that people wrote about our culture, and I didn't know hip-hop was a culture until the source told me it was, and it was the Bible and everything. And I had something that I could hold on to that was, for me, much greater than sports, in a sense, because it provided some thinking. Because I didn't want to just be just an athlete, or just be somebody who was hanging on the block toking my gun. Like, I wanted to have thought, and hip hop provided that for me. And I wanted to be a voice.
Through his work in the hip hop culture, Jay Hall hopes his legacy leaves an indelible impression on the world. All right. So you know about Jay Hall. I want to rap, but I'm not, because we about to hop into this confession, because, you know, he said he loved hip hop. You know, I like hip hop too. I grew up in the hip hop generation, but we are not here for that. We are here for this confession. So listen up. So excited for this Good Girl Podcast, and y'all want to know why? Because not only do we have Howard in the building, but we also have Detroit in the building. Howard and Detroit. Jay, welcome to the Good Girl Podcast.
What up, though? What up, though? What up, though? I have to. HU. What up, though?
What up, though? What up, though?
What up, though?
Oh my gosh. This is going to be an exciting conversation for several reasons. Because one of that familiarity, but also because of your actual confession. And I think I told you this. It's so funny. I said, when I first reached out to you, I said, I've been praying for an F-boy. And you was like, what? I was like, yeah, I was like, God, I really need an F-boy. And he was like, what? I'm like, no, I've been wanting an F-boy to come on the show so they can share about themselves. So you were an answered prayer. You were an answered prayer. So welcome, and I think I alluded to your confession. But the interesting thing about Jay and I have this picture. I'll say this: when I first reached out to Jay, I think he wasn't sure who I was. So we both went to Howard, both from Detroit, and there's this picture of us together at homecoming. And we look like we've known each other for years. It's like four of us. It's like myself, two of my homegirls, and J Rock. If you're from a certain area, you know who J Rock is at Howard.
Yeah.
And you like, who? What?
That speaks to the power of homecoming.
Yes. So excited to have you, Jay. And so we're gonna hop right into this because I feel like people are on pins and needles. Some women who have been in relationships, some dudes who are currently operating in that way, they ready for your confession. So, Jay, what is your confession?
My confession is that I was an F-boy, but my deeper confession even past that was realizing that I was an F-boy because I didn't know I was an F-boy at that time.
Realizing, that makes a world of a difference. So define F-boy for us from your perspective.
Well, that's the problem. I thought that F-boy had one particular meaning. Hey, you told women one thing and you did something else. You told women you're going to lead them on to a relationship and you lied to them numerous times. You kept cheating on them. You end up messing with one of their best friends. So somebody who was just who intentionally was going to dog a woman, an F-boy, a man who was going to intentionally dog a woman. He went into the situation intentionally knowing he was about to dog this woman and he didn't think none of it. So I didn't think that was me.
I guess from my perspective, and obviously I don't represent all women, but I've had this conversation time and time again. And that typically is how we too define F-boy. And also, if y'all don't know, I think most people know what F-boy is, or what the F stands for in F-boy. It stands for fuck. And that's typically how we define it. Basically, someone who is very aware of their intentions in a relationship, and it strings a person along, strings a woman along, knowing good and well they do not plan on being in a long-term relationship. They don't plan on, doing anything that they're promising. And they also operate under the guise of we're just friends while doing everything but being friends. So I think that's a good definition to start with. So Jay, you talk about, that was your understanding too, but you felt that wasn't you in relationships. How were you in relationships then?
Yeah, I didn't think that was me because I was going by the stories a lot of my homegirls, even before I came to Howard, growing up back home, a lot of the women were telling me stories like, he slept with my best friend, and, Detroit in the hood back in the day, even probably still had a lot of a jungle mentality, like a killer bee going for theirs. And so I was like, I'm not a part of that. And when I got to Howard and, my homegirls was telling me like, oh, he lied. He said that it's just him and I saw him at Union Station with this other girl. I was like, I never did that. And so I was, I thought I was fine. I thought I was fine, honestly. I thought the way I moved in relationship was just, okay, we both know what we came here for. If we're just going to have sex, then we're going to have sex. We're going to be in a relationship. I'm going to tell you I want to be in a relationship, and then we move on. And because I thought that everything was clear, I still didn't pay attention to certain cues that I was doing or my movements or considering that things change, things evolve. You might have started off with no feelings in the beginning or no emotional attachment in the beginning, but as time went on and you and this person start spending quality time with each other, then your stuff grew. I didn't do check-ins myself personally. And then by the time a woman would come to me and saying how she feel, I was still going on the first time we met. So I was looking like, well, what are you talking about? That's not how we started off. That's not what you said. And I was still being committed to that. You know, you and I talked earlier about my loyalty standard. And that was probably the down, you know, when I told you like I could be extremely loyal in the good and bad. The bad part about me being so loyal was I was loyal to what we said in the beginning. Because I'm always going to go back to what you say. I'm not really paying attention to how you moving and giving you grace and thinking that you're evolved. I'm looking at what you said in the beginning. And so my attitude, I didn't have no sympathy for that. I didn't have any empathy for that. And I didn't make an attempt to.
That's interesting. That's so interesting because I think that's the argument a lot of people make. Like, well, this is what I said in the beginning. This is what we agreed upon in the beginning. And therefore we have to be committed to that, as though relationships don't evolve, as though people don't evolve and feelings change, whether they go deeper or whether they don't, whether we realize this really isn't who we are, who we want to be moving forward. And we tend to use that excuse. What I want to do though, I want to back up a little bit and talk about how we got here. So you actually have a blog, Walks and Chews Bubblegum. And you wrote on your blog your confession about being an F-boy. And that's how I reached out to you. What prompted you to even write that?
As you know, my background, I'm a coach for a writer. So I write about music, things happen in our cultures and attitudes. And I've written pieces before, and I've been an advocate about us as Black men recognizing our privilege and how we can be better with Black women and how we can be better to protect them and better supporting them. And I've been big on that. To those that know me, even in my close circles, I have conversations when people are not around. And so I never wanted to be the kind of preachy type that wanted to tell everybody else my perspective and being objective without telling my story, without telling how I got there. I never wanted to put on any kind of image that I was just perfecting God. Like I always thought what I think now. Mm-hmm. And so in time, I always had it in the back of my head that I wanted to write that. You know, it took time to get there, because when I don't know if you've ever done this, whatever, but when you're talking about like your life and you're writing down your life, or if you're even talking about it with your life, or those of us who've been to therapy, when you are talking about your life, that is a process. And it can be, when you're done, you are exhausted. And so I always wanted to do it. And when I felt like it was time, I sat down and I worked on it. And I wanted to be honest, and I didn't want myself to escape. I didn't want to like go back into my intellectual side and be like, well, theoretically, no. We're gonna dig into me, right? And don't escape this. We're gonna dig into your emotional side. Because as vulnerable as I can be in practice, there's still parts of me that's still shielded.
Definitely. You talk about in your blog, you talk about what got you there. You kind of give your upbringing. You talk about how women spoke to you about women and how men spoke to you about women, and how that kind of created this perfect storm of your thought process of accepting this F-boy behavior. What do you think of those types of men or types of women were the most influential of your treatment of women as it relates to you being F-boy?
Part of the American and Black experience, a lot of things that it's like a gumbo. It's like a pot. Our upbringing, and we get older and we go to college or we go into adulthood and we realize we've been putting too much salt in our food. And we start detaching Big Mama salt or Nana salt. Not that we don't love the recipe, but we look at the recipe and what it is and we like, okay, this is high blood pressure all day. It's no wonder my auntie caught diabetes, okay? And that's how you have to start looking at your life. We love the people that brought us here, we love them. You know, I'll never forget those people. I grew up on a very colorful block. Like everybody pitched in to help me and my mom. Because although I have siblings, I grew up only child in the household. It was just me, my mother, and my grandmother. So my whole block, pitched in. From drug dealers to working class people, everybody looked out for me, okay? And so I love these people. I love them to death. I think that they were just trying to give me the best that they could for me to come home, because as a young Black man in the 90s and coming up, hell, even now, the goal was for us to come home. That was the goal. And you were always hearing stories around someone getting set up, and it was always a woman involved. Now, there's a lot you can say to that. There's misogyny. There's a history of how people treat women, especially when it comes to Black women, yada, yada, yada. But the reality was, in that time period, this is what you're being told. And it was like, hey, if you want to come back home, you can't move like this. You got to move like this. When you're sleeping with a woman, you better get up and put your clothes on, because you don't know who's coming through that door. Don't never get comfortable. She wants you to come over on that first day. You better drive around 5 times before you park your car. And you ain't have to sell drugs to be told that. You understand? Like you didn't have to be a gangbanger to be told that. This is what the environment was. And I think they were just trying to have me come home.
Yeah. And so at what point, was there a linchpin moment when you were when you tasted somebody's food, when you was dating some girl or maybe one of your friends where you realized this isn't it, that this type of behavior isn't going to lead me to a place of success in my relationships or just success as a single man?
Listening. And it's something I tell my homeboys to do. Learning to practice in the art form of listening. If you're talking to a woman and 90% of the things that she's telling you, you may already know, it might be that 10% that you might really have to hear. And as I start really sitting on my hands and really listening to my homegirls, I started hearing stories that they were telling me how they were treated and how it happened on my watch. You know what I mean? Like it like they were being treated by men that I knew that I was cool with. I was dapping up. They was my mans. And they were telling me like, yeah, I didn't tell you that he did this. I didn't tell you that he did that. And I was there, I was present. And it started sitting with me. In my own relationships, it was a series of events. It wasn't like, one particular woman in particular, but, I had women I was definitely, committed to and love. But I noticed one of the patterns was this block that I had, this emotional block. And then when I would reveal myself to them, when I would be vulnerable, if I didn't get the reaction that I thought I was going to get, then I was angry, I was upset. And I felt like, okay, well, this is what happens. And I'm going to pull my emotions back in. Because I felt like, well, I told you how you women are out here saying you want men to be more open. So let me go ahead and be open. And now you're going to diss me for that. And now I will come back in. So it was a series over a certain time period.
What are some other examples of you being F-boy? Because for me, shutting down, that doesn't, in my mind, that doesn't say, oh, F-boy. That, to me, that just speaks man. Like, you need to learn how to be vulnerable and be okay with being vulnerable. But that doesn't speak necessarily F-boy.
See, that's the trick, though, Cameo. Like, I thought, and see, this is where we get into a good place. And thank you for saying that. Thank you for challenging that. It can, based upon how you react. Because I was expecting to get a reward. And when I didn't get the reward that I wanted, then I start treating you like you ain't ish to me now. Because I showed you who I am. You treated me like ish. So you know what? Screw you did. So it actually is. You understand? Because we, especially as Black men, we pride ourselves in what we can overcome. That's the Black experience. You've been giving me all this stuff, and look where I am. I come from this, and now I'm here, okay? So there's a reward mental psyche that develops in our brain of thinking we're supposed to be rewarded for what we overcome. And that's not how life plays out, as we all learn, right? Life don't always give you an attaboy, sugar plums, and a gold line trophy. That's not what it gives you all the time. Being vulnerable or being at a place, there's no excuse for me to be there as a man, because here's the thing, there's a lot of women in my life that wasn't vulnerable. There were a lot of women in my life who felt they could only be vulnerable with me. And then when I was vulnerable to them, they didn't want that. They was like, no, what's this? You're supposed to be over that by now. But I dated a lot of strong women who I provided a space for them to be vulnerable, but they didn't know how to give that back to me. Vulnerability is an issue within our community, but I'm not going to try to make it mutually like, okay, well, because definitely men struggle with it. But no, that can be an F-boy behavior, because it's the reaction that we have after that, Cameo. Oh, now I'm vulnerable. Okay, I'm going to shut down. Guess what? I'm not going to look at little things like take you to a restaurant or be nice to you or whatever. I'm not going to do it. Oh, you said you wanted this. You said first we were just having sex, and now you want a relationship. But when I was vulnerable, you shitted on me. Guess what? Nah, you go back to the bottom of the totem pole now, because when I showed you some pieces of it, you ain't treat me right. So you gonna stay there.
It's a lot to somewhat unpack in what you said, but I'm so glad you talked about that reward mentality, and I want to compare it to something, because first of all, thank you for sharing that piece, that this is how some men show up, very much so, that I should get a reward for overcoming. I should get an award essentially for existing. And the thing I want to add to that is the fact that, and I think this is a part of the tension, is the fact that Black women do the same thing, but do not expect an award. And I think that is a part of the tension when we think about relationships, because it's like, oh no, you're just doing what you're supposed to do. And then it's like, oh no, you should treat me differently because I overcame this, or you should support me in a certain way because I was able to, and extend me some grace here. But these are some of the conversations us and our and our friends had. Like, because I can talk, walk, and put on a suit. I'm the best thing walking, so you should throw rose petals at my feet. Those are some of the experiences that we've had. But when you talk about that reward mentality, man, I can definitely see how that's like oil and water, especially for Black women and Black men when a relationship is on the table. And then connecting that to, because I didn't respond in the way you thought I should, you define that as treating me like shit.
And if I could, Cameo, please, I just want to note too that a lot of that thing, especially with the Black American experience, we have adapted a lot of things from, white oppression and how the European system was defining our country. So we always got to do a deep dive in consideration that a lot of our culture was intertwined with that. Women, in my experience, and I've, talking to circles, there's a reward factor they have too. The reward expectancy is different. So the man has been told that, listen, I work hard, I pay this, I become this, therefore my woman should do this for me. A lot of the women I've talked to over years have things, well, listen, I was faithful, I was this, therefore I should get this, okay? That is still a reward type of mentality also too, because you're still not expecting, neither one of you are leaving room for real life or other things or unpredictable things that kind of come in. Neither one. Both, women I've talked to, my homegirls, where they're going through like divorces or whatever, and they like, I gave that man everything. And I'm like, you're right, you did. And it's not saying that you should not have done that. But over time, this is where the relationship got to. So we all have been kind of maybe told, socialized to believe that we're supposed to get something for our behavior, our good behavior.
Yeah. Expectations kill a lot of relationships. And a lot of times we don't even know what those expectations are until we get into that relationship, or until they're unmet. And we have these demands on our partners. What did being an F-boy teach you, about some unhealed parts of you? Because I think a lot of our behaviors, for the most part, are either connected to trauma, which is connected to an unhealed part of us. And so it may have been covering an insecurity. It may have been connected to even an unmet need when you were younger, or just, look, I know some F girls, right? So I know when they turn, I know the point in which they turned into an F girl. It's because some relationship where they gave their all and they just like, F this, I'm about to be a savage, F all these ninjas. I know that was the point in which the shift happened. So I'm curious for you, what behavior, and I know healing isn't linear, but what behavior was revealed? What unhealed part of yourself was revealed when you accepted the fact that you were an F-boy?
Good question. I would say my behavior change of paying. Okay, so my behavior change, the positive part that my behavior change was paying attention more and not necessarily relying on words that had to be actually said to me, and grace to a person. That is what had changed in me. When I was coming up, I didn't necessarily see what it was too, is like I was coming from the block and I was coming from quote unquote the streets. And so a lot of my behavior was based upon survival. What changed for me and gave me that room, I can tell you, Cameo, was when I stopped surviving and living more. Because when I'm surviving, I was living more on defense. I couldn't see anything. I was living more about protecting myself. When I started living, it gave me space to see a lot of the things that I had done wrong in the past and how I can be better like now. If that makes sense, hopefully.
It does. I'm curious about two things, like what was the shift between surviving and thriving? So what were the indicators? But again, I think when we like look back on our behavior, then we realize what it's connected to. And again, some of that, so I'll give you an example. Like for me, I tend to go, if I like a guy or whatever, I may go really, really like deep in the beginning. I don't want to say spilling everything, but you just had these really deep, meaningful conversations. But then after that, I just like, I prepare myself for an exit. And I knew for me that was, and you know, the response like, where you go? Why are you backing up? What happened? You know? And I knew for me that was connected to my experience with my father when, you know, he was still in the picture, but he just left the home. And so the dynamics between our relationship changed. And that was trauma for me. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was trauma for me. So I always prepared myself for someone to exit. And so that was very much connecting to my behavior. Like, let me get the most out of this one moment and then be prepared for them to exit. So pull back. And so that showed up. So when we think about F-boy behavior, and I'm asking these questions because I think there are a lot of women who have been in relationships like you mentioned, and they haven't received any closure. And I think your story can definitely provide some type of healing. And I'm not saying your story is representative of all the F-boys in the world, but no. I think there is some unpacking that happens and that reveals, in a sense, that humanizes, you know, why some men do this. And it is connected to, this is my theory, my non-psychological, non-degreed self theory of why it happens, that it is connected to something that either, you know, you may be avoiding something, some woman hurt you, you know, you had issues with your mom or some women in your life. So for you, what was that connected to? Or even when you talk to some of your homeboys, what was that connected to in terms of their treatment for women like that? Like, what was missing? What hole in their heart was missing? Because I cannot conceptualize like how people, and you mentioned this in your blog, like how people can sleep at night with treating people a certain way.
Yeah, for me, okay, so for me, I would tell you, and I want to be clear, this is for me, not for, I'll tell you about my mans in a second, so I want to be, any of my mans listen to this, I don't want them feeling like, you know, I'll give you that part. For me, mine came from how I live. Half of my friends are dead. The other half are in jail. And we say that so cliche. We don't necessarily sometimes understand the impact it has. But there is rarely anybody who was there with me in the beginning that is around now. Okay? I was the first person to come out of my block to come out of high school. I reminded some of my friends on my block when it was time for them to graduate, because they had been out. My mans and them, when I was coming up, stopped going to school like in middle school and slanging. All right, so I was going to that corner waiting on that bus stop by myself at like 12 and 13. For me, it was all these parts of my life of how I survived. And I keep pinning that on that because in that behavior pattern, it was about doing what you got to do to survive, and it's not going to be pretty. Because what I was telling you earlier, my mother was real big on giving me reality. She didn't fantasize anything. And so for me, I had a very early understanding, or to the understanding that I thought at that time of things are going to get dirty. But if you're going to come out unscathed, you got to come out with less scars as possible. So I was trying to live, go to school and do the right thing, quote unquote. And women were just a part of the experience for me in that moment. It was just, you date women, okay? Women are with you, you date them until they show you whatever, and then when you don't want to mess with them no more, you leave. When I came out to Howard, everything was like, I'm trying to survive in school because I'm the first person in life to even think about college and go to school. So I'm trying to survive in school. I'm not paying attention to the past. I'm not paying attention to my behavior. I'm not paying attention. I'm thinking like, okay, that's just part of the drawing board. Women are just part of the drawing board until you find someone you love. It was hot and cold. It wasn't no gray area. It was hot and cold. Either you are just going to have sex with this girl or you're going to be with her. And mentally in college, I wasn't trying to fall in love because I wanted to finish school. Because my experience coming to Howard was different from everybody else's. I didn't come through Legacy. I didn't come through Cass, King, and Renaissance and these schools with this pipeline. You know, I'm the first of my environment to even get here. So I can't risk falling in love and falling off track. So I got to stay focused. because I'm doing this for, I got family, I got my mom, I got all these people I'm doing this for. So I got to keep a part of me kind of shut off. And the times that I did risk that and it didn't come back the way I wanted, then I was like, all right, that's your lesson. Keep focused. For a lot of the men I've been around, it comes from various reasons. It comes from a lot of times what their fathers taught them and what their uncles told them and what the barbershop has taught us. And a lot of that conversation was justified through those actions, because unfortunately, a lot of men in our culture talk about getting married or settling down when you're done with everything else. Versus my sisters and all of them, when they were talking about being committed and settling down, it was the beginning of something. You want to get married and be committed because this is the beginning of something for you. So you want to achieve that. Where men, we were mostly taught like, okay, get everything out your system. So when you get there, because it's ball and chain time, it's lockdown time, it's no more fun. Now, on a personal note, I was always somebody who pushed that on traditions. I was never really big on traditions and roles because I'm an example of somebody who is not a stereotype. I prided myself in going against that. So if I was always able to look at things that I didn't feel like tradition was going to suit me, eventually I was going to lead over to the treatment of women. And when I started seeing that the parallel lines of sexism and racism and understanding and educating myself more about how we adapted some of these traits from white oppression and how we have mimicked some of these things and the treatment of our household, then I start checking myself. And I think a lot of dudes are willing to do that, but we're not in practice of practicing our emotions, versus women have been able to, from society and culturally, to practice their emotions at a very young age. Versus most men don't get to talk about their emotions until they get in their first locker room, their first dorm room. That's like the best time where they can talk about their emotions. At that point, you 20, 21, you out of practice. You behind. You 18 years behind on practicing your emotions. So I think they want to. Like, keep this in mind. I think a lot of dudes really do want to. And they don't understand necessarily what protected Black women and all that other stuff is. They're trying to understand that, but they're not willing to let go of some of the things that got them there.
Yeah. That's good. Something you said risk falling in love, and you unpacked it a lot. And you talked about the ball and chain and how men very much are taught this and subscribe to this because this is the narrative that they hear, that falling in love is a risk. It is a bad thing. It does not add to your life. Bringing a woman on is a responsibility. These are the narratives that they hear very, very clearly, explicitly and implicitly, that a woman cannot add value to your life. And I'm even going to push back on my language. I don't even want this to turn into that the only way that a woman becomes valuable in your life and is regarded as something great is because she can do something for you. I'm going to push back on that a little bit too. But how do you plan, like, since you've come to this revelation and with that in mind, how do you plan on changing that narrative?
Two things with that. Number one, always being open to being checked. I do pride myself in having a nice, diverse group of homegirls. Some of them are going to listen to this. They my homies, and they check me like it ain't nothing. I mean,
sit down. Shut up.
Listen, we can be doing good. I got one homegirl in particular. I know she is smiling when she probably will hear this. We can be doing good for like 7 days, and then day 8, she'll be like, Jay, I was not cool with X, Y, and Z. And I have to sit on my hands and listen. Now, sometimes I'm like, all right, listen, blah, blah, blah. And she gives me that, but I always hear her out. I got other homegirls that be like, listen, I was uncomfortable with X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, all right. I'm always allowed. I don't never flex when I'm getting checked. I don't care if it's coming from my mother. I don't care if it comes from my sisters. I don't care if it's coming from my homegirls. I don't care if it's coming from you. I don't care if it's coming from what I see on TV. I'm always going to be willing to hear something. So that's number one. The second thing I do is my little homies. My background, I used to be a youth counselor. I was a youth counselor to pay rent because Washington, D.C. is expensive. And it was also a second passion at that time. I was a youth counselor for like 10 years, and I worked with young women and young men. That's where a lot of my progressive views came from, because I saw how it landed on young girls, and I saw how it landed on young men. And that's on a personal side note, that was kind of why I wasn't with a lot of traditions. Because Valentine's Day, some of my young girls was on suicide watch, and my boys were sleeping in late. And I was like, this is a problem. But the one thing that I try to do is with my young men that are around me is try to stop that stuff like now. You know, I let them speak so they can tell me, Then when they tell me, I'm like, nah, that's not cool. That's not cool. And I articulate to them why that's not cool. And because I think about when I was coming up, if a big homie confirmed it, it was cool. You know what I'm saying? Like if he didn't tell you it wasn't all right, it was all right. If your big sisters didn't tell you it wasn't all right, it was all right. So for me, I try to be that checkpoint for them. So those are the two things I'm trying to do moving forward.
So I talked about changing the narrative, and that works for the generation that's coming. For the men that are currently in it, the men that basically are not aware of their actions, and some that are very much aware of their actions, that I'm manipulating these relationships, or that women are just along for the ride, and I'm focused on other things. How would you communicate to them the harm? Because it's harmful. At the end of the day, it's harmful to both the person, both the F-boy and the person that is receiving this behavior. It is deeply harmful because you are, emotions are involved, matters of the heart. And matters of the heart shift our perspective. They shift how we walk in the world, how we receive love, how we give love. They can definitely, when we're hurt deeply, they can definitely even slow our purpose, interfere what we're called to do. So for those who are currently operating this way, what would you say are the first steps? And almost for both, because again, it's someone receiving this pain and it's someone giving this pain, knowingly or unknowingly. What are the first steps in peeling back those layers? Because I think you alluded to it first, but that it's hard work. Like it is hard to think about yourself, to dig into those layers, to explore that trauma. But what are those first steps to say, hey, I need to take a step back?
First thing I always tell even my mans when nobody's around is stop being an echo chamber. Stop repeating things because you've been repeating them since the 90s or the early 2000s without giving it any thought. If you think about the infamous line of you can't make a hoe a housewife. Like think about what that line means. Like think about it. Like, okay, you've been repeating it, but what exactly does it mean? Does it mean like, okay, she's been sleeping around somebody, so she's not gonna be faithful? Okay, well, you've been sleeping around with somebody. And another thing I try to tell my mans or any friends or anybody that's listening at this moment is to stop relying on when you get a daughter to want to make a change. We hear that all the time. Like Will Smith literally just said it. Like, now that I got kids, I realize what I did wrong. Okay, that's fine, but it's been 30 years from the original unveil and what she had to suffer for. So you had to go out and make a baby in order to realize what you did. And I understand that. I have a niece who's the number one individual in my life. There's nothing I won't do for my niece, but I cannot look at her as my factor of like when I want to treat women fairly. It cannot come because I'm now scared that some man is going to treat her that way, same way I acted. We got to start doing things a little bit better and earlier. And I will only challenge anybody, even if you don't agree with what I have to say. Like, think about what we're doing and understanding that these things don't necessarily go away. They just get passed on. And I would ask of any man who's listening to this on the same level as me or don't see it on the receiving end or whatever end, is what are you getting out of it, honestly? Like being an F-boy in all honesty, like what you think about a reward factor, what is the reward? Like what is the reward of you treating a woman as such? Because honestly, if she's not the person for you, just don't deal with her. Now, I want to be clear. There's something different. It's a difference between being an F-boy and manipulating somebody versus two people who have a mutual agreement what they do. If a woman and y'all just got this type of level of relationship and y'all discuss that, fine. And if y'all want to do y'all checkpoints every once in a while, that is within your right. We're not talking about that.
Right.
We are talking about those where you know what it is and you are leading this individual in a pathway that you know you don't want in order to drop her at the bag in order to move forward. And I've done it. So it's like, you know what I mean? Like I'm not as, like I've done it. I've had a rest haven until I thought something better was going to come along, like it was a job. And a woman is a human. She's not a job. It's just like anything else. Like they're human. And we want that same grace and attention to be treated for us. And we don't want to look like we don't want to look like we're just animals and we don't want to just be disposed. We got to start reflecting that same behavior. We got to start doing those same practices towards our women.
Yeah. Jay, this conversation has been dope. I'm ready for like a part two. But I think the things you shared, I mean, for lack of better words, like it was deep. It was what we needed. I think it was revelatory in terms of opening Pandora's F-boy box, you know?
I might be labeled as a snitch at this point. That's what
You have comments on your blog.
Well, thank you, Cameo.
But I think at the heart of it, I mean, real talk, but at the heart of it is healing. It's healing. Because I think the last thing you said, like, what does it really do for you? What does it really do for women? What does it really do for the community at whole, at large? What does it do? It does nothing.
It doesn't.
It's a means to an end. Like,
if you want to make progress for the betterment of Black people and the betterment of our Black culture and the betterment of our Black community, Black men, we have to be willing to challenge those things that benefit us. There's a benefit to being a man. Just like white women, there's a benefit for them being white. And for us, we have to challenge that. There's an increase of Black men who are aligning with Trump. What does that tell you? Because there's still a benefit that I receive in his package. And if I really want to look out for my sister who has been looking out for me since the test of time, and those women who looked out for me and they continue to look out for me, you looking out for me right now, then I have to be able to challenge those things that I get rewarded for and be like, nah, this ain't good. I can't accept this package for what it is. And we got to be willing to do that.
Yeah. All right, Jay. Well, thank you so much for being on the Good Girl podcast. Your confession was definitely needed. It was definitely welcome. Again, you were an answered prayer. I said, God, I needed the F-boy.
You and I got to talk on the side about that.
It was only for the show. Only for the show.
And it was confessions of a formal F-boy.
There we go. All right.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for allowing me to speak and have that grace. I mean, I think what you're doing is good work. I think it takes a lot of patience to want to actually hear that and sit with that. So truly, it is an honor to be able to articulate that and say that. I really do appreciate you looking out for me. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This is the Good Girl Podcast.
And again, thank you so much for listening to the Good Girl Podcast. If you are not already, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our podcast, and share this. This is how we pay the bills. And as always, I just appreciate y'all for listening. This is a real thing for me, and if you want to continue to support us, you can also head to our website and purchase some material. We got some Believe in the Good items. All right. Thank you for listening to the Good Girl Podcast.